in a two-parent household, there's often an anxious parent and a non-anxious parent. And the non-anxious parent is usually dismissed.
Like from the
not
house?
Not to call anyone out. No. From the conversation, like, you're not paying enough attention. You don't understand what's going on. You don't know how hard kindergarten is. You don't know how hard the SAT is. You're not in all these conversations I'm in. One of the things that happens is the more often I become anxious, the more likely I am to become anxious because my amygdala enlarges and it develops this hyper responsiveness. And so anxiety starts to lie to me and make me believe it's true, which is completely what we would say Satan does.
Sissy Goff, child and parent counselor for 30 years now and author of 13 books, here with us on the Maybe God podcast to talk about her latest book, The Worry-Free Parent. I'm so honored to have you here, Sissy. Thanks for joining us on Maybe God.
I'm so honored to be with you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I've been blown away. I shared a little bit with you about the response from our listeners upon hearing that you're going to join us. Been blown away by how many emails and social media engagements we've gotten just by dropping your name. So,
I'm so glad.
Oh, I'm honored and that you would have that you would join us. I know you've got a lot going on, but could you just maybe share a little bit about what you think it is about your work that's breaking through, especially with our female listeners, but really with everyone? And what is it, do you think, that you're offering that people are hungry for?
Well, I can tell you what I hope I'm offering, and maybe it's landing, but I think I'm a part of a team with our work is called Raising Boys and Girls Together. And we had written a book called Are My Kids on Track? I think, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, maybe now. And I had a little section on anxiety in kids. And my publisher came to me and said, would you write a book for young girls about anxiety? Because it sounds like that the average age of onset used to be 8. It's dropped to 6 with signs as young as 4 and 5. And I, as a therapist for all these years, said, I'd be happy to write a book for little girls if I can write one for parents too. Then those books came out, and 6 months later, the pandemic hit. And then I ended up writing one for adolescents. And then now I'm, in all these years, worried about parents maybe the most. So I've written one for parents. And so, maybe because I'm sitting with kids and families every day, and it makes me a little more privy to where they're struggling and what's going on. And my hope is always to offer a lot of practical help, but also a lot of grace, because I don't think it's ever been as hard to grow up. I don't think it's ever been as hard to parent. And there are a million voices coming at parents today. And I think a lot of them that just add to the pressure. And I want my voice to be one that really alleviates it and says, you're doing great. I'm cheering you on. I think that's what I say more than anything else. Maybe that's why people have attached.
Yeah, those words match with your smile, which is just a radiant, sort of comforting smile. And you have a comforting presence. So and I think in an anxious world, I mean, it speaks volumes. And so I'm grateful for all that you're doing and all the lives you're touching. And it's so interesting to me what you've just said. I think you're right, that it is in many ways extremely difficult, maybe more than ever, to raise well-adjusted, happy kids, and people are feeling that pressure. I don't know exactly why it's that way. Before we get too deep into the weeds, we will go there in a second. Just tell us a little bit about your practice. I know you're in Nashville, but it sounds like your practice, Daystar, is just reaching thousands of people every year, and it just sounds like an extraordinary thing. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's a really neat place. I feel very privileged. I moved to Nashville to go to grad school at Vanderbilt, and I did my internship in 1993 at Daystar, and they offered me a job, and I have been stuck ever since. And I can't imagine being anywhere else. Because we're working so much with kids, our office is in a little yellow house with a white picket fence, and we have 13 humans on staff, but we have 5 dogs who are most of the kids who come. It's their favorite therapists. And we do individual counseling. We do group counseling. We have a little retreat program called Hopetown in the summers. It just offers a lot of different facets of the counseling experience. But if you were to walk in, we have popcorn popping in the kitchen. I mean, it's just super relational. we're trying to make it as disarming as we can because so many kids are afraid to go. And my favorite quote, a little girl walked out of our building after the first time with her mom, and she said, Mom, I'm not going to Daystar for counseling. I'm just going there to talk about my problems.
Mission accomplished.
Which I love.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
great.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I think when you're thinking about working with kids, those aspects of it are just so important. And so it's a really magical place. Plus, getting to take your dog to work and working with kids all day. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't get much better than that.
Right. And I know from following you on social media that you've recently lost a dear, precious pup, Lucy,
I did.
15
Yes.
years old, I think, and just as sweet as she could be by all the looks of her. And having not met her in person, it seems like she was quite the extraordinary pup. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, I'm sorry about that loss. I know it's profound to lose a pet.
Thank you.
But what is the role of the dog in the therapy sort of environment? What does that accomplish?
I think it's a lot of the softening process. Lucy had this really great trick where if I held her the right way and I said, Lucy, wave, she would wave at the kids with both of her paws. And so, I think as many kids that come in that feel afraid to come in and be able to sit on the floor. I mean, anybody under the age of 12, their first appointment, I would always sit on the floor with them. We would play with Lucy, pet her. And then there's not the threatening eyeball to eyeball. I'm sitting with this grown-up I've never met. And in my book for elementary age girls called Braver, Stronger, Smarter, I wrote about Lucy a lot. And so she has touched a lot of girls all over the world, which makes it even harder. I was speaking in Tuscaloosa this weekend, and a mom came up and had me sign her book to her daughter. And I said, have you told her about Lucy? And she said, I can't even bring myself to do it. She's attached to her so much. And so I told stories about Lucy and anxiety and working through her fear and being brave. And I had all these pictures of her in superhero capes. So she touched a lot of kids over the years.
Well, that's awesome. And I know your heart's broken, but I pray that you experience some healing. And you've got a new baby pup already, and hopefully that pup brings you a lot of joy as well. But Lucy is irreplaceable, obviously.
No, thank you, Eric. You're so
And
kind.
one word that you used to describe Lucy's role in your work was consistency, and not just in your work, but in your life. I remember you in a social media post saying something about what a consistent the love of a dog is. And I think that speaks a lot about our need for consistency in a world that's increasingly anxious. And the consistency of the love of a dog. Cat people are just totally lost. They don't even know. They don't have no idea what they're missing. But the consistency of it speaks to us in a way that, like, look, the world's crazy sometimes, but it's going to be okay. Like some things are the same, and some things never change, and love is one of them. And I think that's deeper than it would seem. The role of a dog like Lucy in that environment.
The amount of kids over the years who've said things. I can remember one girl specifically who had lost her dad, and she said, the person I talk to the most about it is my dog.
Yeah. You're going to make me cry now.
So exactly. I'm sorry.
No, that's
but
right.
I love how you said that. I think it's so true.
Yeah. So you've been doing this work for 30 years now, and I'm just curious, it's been a pretty wild 30 years relative to, in historical terms. These past 30 years have been extraordinary technologically and, in terms of things going on in the world. And what are you seeing different that has changed now versus when you started in this work in terms of what presenting symptoms and issues kids are bringing?
Well, I would have to top the list with anxiety. It is just rampant anymore. It's 1 in 4 kids are dealing with it. 1 in 3 adolescents. Girls are twice as likely as boys to struggle with it. And I think part of why your female audience maybe responded when you announced, because 1 in 3 adults and women are twice as likely to deal with anxiety. And so that feels like it is leading the charge in terms of why people are coming in to see us. And then I think a lack of self-regulation too, particularly among boys, that feels really significant.
Yeah, interesting. I confess to you that I have a few. I know they're blocks, and so I'm acknowledging these blocks as my problem and no one else's. But I have a block when it comes to probably to therapy writ large. Like I probably have maybe some negative experience in my past with, professional therapists or whatever. And then in specific with anxiety, I don't really feel like I'm an anxious person, and I don't understand how someone could be. Anxiety makes me anxious, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I feel like I'm out of my depth when I'm dealing with anxious people. But it's probably just a cover up. I fully acknowledge that I'm probably just playing mind games on myself. But it does feel like foreign territory to me. Why do you think anxiety is on the rise today? Are there any specific sort of sources?
Definitely. I think there are several, but one of the things I read in researching the Worry Free Parent book was that anxiety is a response to cumulative stress over time, which I think we could just say that. I mean, the fact that we have lived through a global pandemic that no one, that we know has ever lived through, none of our parents, grandparents.
Right.
I mean, the stress we lived with during that, and that continues to ripple over. I mean, I'm seeing more social anxiety still as a result of the pandemic than I've ever seen. So I think that's a part of it. I think overscheduling. I think we're doing too much culturally. I think that is definitely a piece of it. We don't have enough downtime. And I think, too, a big part of it is technology. And whether that's just, I remember I was working with a girl with a psychiatrist. Both of us were working with her, and she was struggling a lot with anxiety. And she said, Sissy, even to look at our devices, our brains are being bombarded by stimulation all the time that's moving really fast. And she said, it is difficult for our brains to settle back down after that. And she said, especially a brain that's still developing does not know how to do it. And so it really mimics an anxious state when we're being bombarded that much. And so I think that, and then I do think, I mean, I have been saying a lot lately to parents that I want them to be really careful who they're following on social media, because I think that sense of pressure, the amount of people, even like me, that are setting ourselves up as experts that all have different opinions.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to say to parents, pick two people and only follow two in terms of parenting or decorating or whatever it is, because the inundation of voices makes us feel like we're not getting it right that much more. And so I think that complicates it.
I can relate to that. I'm currently trying to learn how to play golf, and I'm in my 40s. I should know how to play golf by now, and I don't. And I'm getting advice from 5 or 6 different people at the same time. And you would be surprised the intricacies of something as silly as a golf swing.
Oh, no. Yes.
And it's freaking me out, Sissy. It's freaking me out.
Sure.
Because I can't get it right, depending on who I'm talking to at any given time. So,
and they're telling you all different things about your stance and your all the stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you're saying in this world of constant information, this steady stream of information, people are they're looking for help, but they're getting conflicting advice. And if you get one person's advice right and apply it, you're getting someone else's wrong, and you're getting that, it's clear how that could induce more anxiety.
Yes, I think my mom, the only parenting person she listened to was Dr. Spock. And I think all he really said was smile at your babies. And so it was a little simpler back then.
Right. Those were the days, right? When we just stuffed all our stuff away and didn't deal with it.
Totally.
So the only question I would have about, the pandemic and technology is like the pandemic and technology, all of that seems to equally affect boys and girls, but girls and women seem to be especially, especially vulnerable to this anxiety problem. And why do you think that is? What's the difference there?
Well, if I were going to start with girls, I mean, girls are leading the statistics. Boys are more likely to get help. And I wrote a book called Raising Worry-Free Girls, and I talk about this continuum from imploders to exploders. And the exploders feel anxious, and it comes out as anger. It comes out as demandingness. They just get really big with the emotions. Now, if our guys on staff at Daystar were going to overgeneralize, they would say most boys lean towards being explosive. Whereas I would say most girls lean towards being implosive. They're the kids that parents go to the parent-teacher conference and the teacher says, I wish every child in my class was just like your daughter. Yeah. Because she's trying so hard. And in fact, anxiety and intelligence are really closely linked. And so these girls are really smart and they're really capable and they want to please and they're trying hard. And so not only are they anxious about getting it right, but because they want to please, they are going to lean towards what we would historically have considered more positive emotions. Happy, grateful, proud, all those kind of things. Now, emotions we know are just data. They're not positive and negative, but girls are going to lean that way. And so they're not going to be as likely to talk about disappointment and hurt and anger because they feel like those things aren't good and they're not being good. And so, like you were talking about stuffing, I mean, they are stuffing a lot of those emotions. And I think it starts young and it lasts for a really long time. And I think for a lot of adult women walking around, there's that sense of, I've got to be kind and I've got to be appropriate and aware and care for all these people and do all these things. And so I can't let all these emotions come out. Not only that, but I don't even have time to sit and process my emotions or talk to somebody because I've got to prioritize my kids or I've got to prioritize the people in my life. And so I think for a lot of women, there's just not the opportunity, it feels like, to take care of yourself and to do the things you need to do to work through your own anxiety.
Yeah, that makes sense. And earlier you said something sort of in passing, and I kind of let it go. It got my attention when you said they approached you about writing a book about anxiety in kids, and you insisted on also having the opportunity to write one about parents. And you said that in an adamant way, like that was really near to your heart. Can you say a little bit more about why that is? What's the connection there?
Well, I want any parent who's listening to hear me say this with a lot of grace. But I believe the reason I said that then and what I still believe is we're really in an age of rescuing kids. In light of anxiety, the two most common parenting strategies are escape and avoidance. And so I'm seeing more parents than I ever have when their kids come upon something hard, stepping in and pulling them out of that thing. And in all the research, the definition I came up with of anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of ourselves. And so with kids, if kids come upon this hard thing and we step in and we rescue them, we're basically confirming that definition. You're right. It's too big. You need me. You can't handle this on your own. Never intentionally. That is not the message we're trying to communicate, but that's what they receive when we do that. And so I really wanted to, in that one, push in on parents to say, you've got to help your kid, let your kids and help your kids do the hard things. And then I felt it that much more strongly, which is why I wrote the new book, to say, not only do you have to let your kids do hard things, but you've got to do your own work. And I believe that's the best thing we can do for kids.
I think we want to do our kids' work because our work is harder.
That's a great statement.
I really think that. I think I want to solve my kids' problems because they're solvable. And I can be a hero for a minute, and I don't have to deal with my messes that are less solvable, in my opinion. You know, it's probably not as...
Makes so much sense.
I love your little semi-definition of anxiety, which is that it's an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of yourself. And that's what happens when anxiety does overcome us. That's been my experience, is that it is absolutely an overestimation of the problem. But my kids' problems are a lot smaller than mine, and I feel like I can, you know, and who doesn't want to rescue their kids? Like, of course, that seems like a good thing. Yeah.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And you seem to be suggesting that it's maybe the worst thing you can do for your kids is to get them out of their problems, you know, without them facing them. Is that right?
Yes. I would say that.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a hard thing to say, but I think that's very true.
Yeah, that's tough.
I know.
I have two kids, and I do that for one of them, but not the other. And it might be a little bit of a, you know, I'm a little bit of a gender, like I'm a sexist maybe, but I want to rescue my daughter and let my son fend for himself.
Yes.
That's my...
Well, I'm so glad for you to say that, because I think that's true of most parents. And I don't even think, I mean, I do think there's some dads are harder on sons and moms are harder on daughters. But I think some of that is because they feel like an extension of me, and I don't want them to make the same mistakes I made. And I think they push our buttons more because they're often like us too. And so I'm so grateful for you to say that out loud, because I think a lot of parents can relate.
Thank you. I feel like this is turning into my counseling session. Like I'm going to owe you something at the end of the...
No, not at all. But maybe it'll help you have a better experience than...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing I've heard you say again and again that is really stood out to me is the idea of anxiety being something that is taught and caught. And sort of we pass it on to our kids. Again, this is another reason why it's important for us to deal with our stuff as parents. But how exactly is anxiety contagious in that way?
Well, it's fascinating because, well, I mean, like we're talking about, that's one way. When I'm rescuing them, then they feel like they're not capable. And I believe a lack of capability creates a lack of confidence, which creates more anxiety. But also, there's something that happens even in what are called our mirror neurons in our brain, which is a part of our growing network of connections in our brain. And mirror neurons are so much of how we learn to do things. You can tell me to tie my shoes all day long, but until I watch you tie yours, I'm not going to know how. Same with water skiing. I can hear somebody say, bend your knees, keep your arms straight, all of that. But until I watch someone, I'm not going to learn it. And, you know, to think about a child and a snake, kids don't have to be told to be afraid of a snake or a spider so much of the time. Maybe boys do a little bit, but most kids don't. But especially if they see us interact with one and they immediately learn this is something to be afraid of.
Right.
And the same is true for a lot of different aspects of our life. And so that's part of how it's taught and caught. And another is part of what happens when we get anxious is the blood flow in our brain shifts. It leaves the prefrontal cortex, which helps us think rationally and manage our emotions. And it goes to the amygdala, that is the fight or flight region of our brain. And so I believe there's something that happens when one person's amygdala gets tripped that another's does as well. Which is why parents will say to me, my child's like a crazy person when they get to this place. And then I jump right in with them.
Yeah.
Because all of our amygdalas get flipped. And anybody who's listening that's ever had that experience knows nobody comes to a healthy, productive conversation when your amygdala is taken over. I mean, the rational part of your brain's not even getting blood. And so until we can calm down, we're not going to get to a better place.
So when you're around anxious people, you get more anxious? Is that basically?
I believe absolutely you do.
Yeah.
Yes. Haven't you felt that before when you're sitting with somebody really anxious and you start to feel that way? Yes.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yes. I don't want to start naming names, but yes, I definitely feel that way. And I know I can have that effect on people too. If I get, maybe I wouldn't use the word anxiety, but it probably is. I just call it stressed. If I'm under a lot of stress, I tend to I stress people out, and I don't always deal with stress well. And so that makes sense to me. What are the signs of a parent who is communicating anxiety, who is anxious, who is, bringing the anxiety home and imparting it on our children? What sort of, I mean, we can't really say, well, I feel the blood flow shifting from one part of my brain to the other.
Right.
What are the real life symptoms of that?
Well, I'm doing a parenting seminar a lot on this now, and in it I ask parents 3 questions. So we could ask these 3 questions. One is your thought circular or linear? So with anxious thoughts, with non-anxious thoughts, maybe we have a worst case scenario thought, something like that comes in our brain. If we're not anxious, that thought comes in and it goes right back out. Are my kids okay right now? Did I fail that? It comes in and it goes out. If we're anxious, the thought comes in and it gets stuck in this loop. With little kids in my office, I'll call it the one loop roller coaster at the fair. And so is the thought circular or is it linear and moving you towards action in a healthy, productive way? So that would be one question. The second would be, is your emotion as a result of that thought bigger than the situation warrants? That's often going to be a tipping off place where we're going to have a lot of emotion around anxious thoughts.
Yeah.
And number 3, does your thought cause you to be more possessive, where you're holding tighter, trying to rescue the things that we were talking about earlier? Or does it help you let your kids go and move forward and stretch their legs and muscles and take risks in healthy, age-appropriate ways? So those are my 3 big questions with parents to kind of help them look through their thoughts, examine their thoughts a little bit.
It's hard because if you are in an anxious state, then you're going to feel like you're having an appropriate level of emotions. Like, like the
That's
anxiety can be deceptive.
Yes. My nephew does occupational therapy, which is, I think, a beautiful practice for young kids. And I was talking to his occupational therapist just last week, and she said one of their favorite questions with young kids is it a little deal, a medium deal, or a big deal? And when we're anxious, always a medium deal is going to feel like a big deal and a little deal is going to feel like a medium. But I think when we can back up and have things like that, even that we go back to in our minds, okay, is this really a little deal or a medium deal or a big deal? I
Right.
think we can get to more perspective in those moments.
Yeah. What about though when someone's anxious and they're making a big deal out of a medium deal, and it seems like telling them that is the least productive thing you could possibly tell them? I think about, totally hypothetical, this is not me and my wife, but as a husband comes home from work to an anxious wife, and the last thing you want to tell her is you're just being anxious, like you're making a big deal out of a medium deal. Like, how do you actually get at the issue without seeming condescending or being dismissive?
Yes. That's a great question. I mean, if we go back to the idea that anybody who's anxious is trying really hard and they care so much, I think when we can, and this is what we talk a lot with our younger counselors, newer counselors at Daystar about, I think anytime somebody feels like we're in it with them, that we're coming alongside them, that we see them, I think we have a lot more credibility to say hard things. Mm-hmm. And so even to say, honey, I know you are trying so hard. I love how thoughtful you are with our kids, or I love the intentionality that you have and the energy you put into this. And I'm wondering if there might be, at this point, a little anxiety underneath it, or if it may feel like it's gotten bigger. And maybe are you looping? You tell me.
Yeah.
But I think when we can start it with a lot of empathy, a lot of reminding them, because I believe those things are true.
Sure.
I'm not just trying to blow smoke.
Yeah.
I really believe those things are true. And I know in my life, if people will tell me they know I'm trying hard, and that they see that whatever I'm feeling is important, then they have a lot more latitude to say anything with me. But I want to hear those things first.
Yeah. And that you actually value who they are and what they bring to the table. And, I think as a typically non-anxious person myself, I think that's not always right either. Like sometimes, events in life warrant some anxiety. And if I'm distant from that, we need to work as a team.
Yeah.
And
right.
and
well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I love what you're saying, because one of the other things, I mean, I did so much research to write these 4 books. I could spit it out all day. But one of the other things that I read that I thought was fascinating was in a 2-parent household, there's often an anxious parent and a non-anxious parent.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And the non-anxious parent is usually dismissed.
Like from the
not
house?
to call anyone out. No. From the conversation, like, you're not paying enough attention. You don't understand what's going on. You don't know how hard kindergarten is. You don't know how hard the SAT is. You're not in all these conversations I'm in. But what the research went on to say is how important the non-anxious parent is, because and I'm going to go ahead and pick on my gender, because I think, ladies, obviously we're leading the statistics on anxiety. And I think there is something about us that when we get anxious, we get so intense. Mm-hmm. Best of intentions, we mean so well, but we get really intense. And I think, Eric, my guess is you, and I think a lot of men I know, some women I know do a beautiful job at this, but I think when you're not as anxious, you can have a great sense of humor, number one. And I think number 2, you can challenge kids in a way where they can move forward and take risks in a way that we have a harder time. And so I do feel like that non-anxious voice is so important. And like you said, the teamwork is crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're raising a bigger point that probably is part of the reason why I'm a little suspicious of the whole mental health conversation happening in our culture right now, is because I think the push is to respect people who are anxious and to really kind of champion anxiety almost as a good
Not push
thing.
them forward.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then to not respect people that aren't anxious, that don't experience that, and to I guess not respect non-anxiety like you do anxiety, if that makes any sense at all.
That's interesting.
I think in the past it would have been the opposite, probably, where anxious people are sort of dismissed, and now I think we are to a point now where the non-anxious ones are more likely to be dismissed or discarded. Is that
so interesting?
Is that anything you've noticed in your practice?
What I have noticed is what you're saying about us, mental health. I'm so grateful it's such an important part of the conversation now. And I do think we are over-diagnosing. And I think diagnosis can sometimes become a cop-out. Like, don't require anything of me. I shouldn't have to do hard things. And everything I'm saying, and any mental health person would say, is to work through anxiety, you have to do hard things. And I think, I had a group of seniors in high school. I just thought, I thought it'd be interesting to ask them this question. I said, how do you think kids are defining themselves today? And this one girl said, I think we're defining ourselves by mental health issues.
Really?
And yes. And she said, she's brilliant. She said, part of the problem is, number one, it makes us focus more on the negative than the positive. And number two, it takes away the power of the words for the people who are really experiencing them.
Wow.
And I definitely see that in my practice with adolescents. I feel like kids are diagnosing themselves constantly. And I think there's this sense of, if I don't have a diagnosis, what I'm feeling isn't valid, which makes me really sad, because feeling stressed is a really big thing, and feeling sad, but they don't say I'm sad, they say I'm depressed.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
and I think it's part of why people are using that kind of language again, is it's just become a cultural norm. And so
Right.
I think we need to listen, because we don't know, and we need to obviously take it seriously, but I feel concerned sometimes that we're taking away the power of the words too.
Yeah, it's powerful, and it's something we should all be thinking about. And I think it does connect with what you're saying about parenting, which is anxiety being caught and taught. And parents, our tendency is to swoop in and save the day. And one way we can sort of do that is by pursuing, a diagnosis, or more than one, and medicating, or, trying to treat our kids in that way. That really, it can be good. I don't want to say that it's
Right.
not.
There's
Like,
certainly
it totally
a time
can
for
be
it.
useful.
Yes.
But it can also be a way of just putting a Band-Aid on something that gets us out of dealing with the harder things, both
Doing the hard
ourselves
work.
and our
Yes.
kids. One thing you said, I think you were quoting a patient of yours, or a client of yours, that said this, but you said that a parent's job in a situation of high anxiety is to be the calmest person in the room. What did you mean by that?
Well, I was quoting a dad who said that in my office. He had just been to a conference. He's a CEO of his company, and he said, the speaker said, a CEO's job is to be the calmest person in the room. And he said, I couldn't help but immediately think about my family and think that must be a parent's job too. And I would say high anxiety, high anger, anything, a parent's job is to be the calmest person in the room. Now, that doesn't mean we don't say, I'm feeling frustrated right now, and I'm going to need a few minutes, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling worried right now, and I'm going to have to go do some things to bring myself back down from 10 if we're thinking about a 1 to 10 scale. But when we're reacting with the same emotion as they are, again, if we think about the amygdala, we're only making things worse for them. It is not helpful.
Yeah.
And they're not learning healthy coping strategies on their own.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably, that statement is obviously just it's an oversimplification, but it's a beautiful sort of
Sure.
way to get your head around it, especially for a parent that tends to be anxious. I think that parent's job is to be the calmest person in the room, or to be appropriately calm, let's say. But there's obviously other parents like myself who need to be appropriately assertive, probably. Like, we can all sort of shrink back into our comfort zones, right? Like, we have to help each other and get out of those comfort zones and meet in the middle sometimes, right?
Yes, know where we need to grow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you talk about, over the years, seeing different types of parents emerge, and there are several types that you point out in your book. By the way, if anybody's watching and wants to pick up the book, this is the book here, The Worry-Free Parent. What are some of those? I found it pretty humorous, actually, the types that you point out, and what are the characteristics of those types?
Yes, I would say most parents I see fall into one of these 5 categories. One is helicopter parenting, which we have seen. All of us know exactly what that is, stepping in, controlling things. Another is bulldozer parenting, or do I call it bulldozer or snowplow? Snowplow parenting.
Yep.
Yes, snowplow parenting, where I'm going to clear out all the moguls ahead of them so they have nothing scary in their path, nothing hard in their path. I want it to be as easy as it can for them. Or backhoe parenting, where I'm going to go behind them and clean up all their mistakes. I
And
know a
that one
family
is,
who,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I know a family who tried to sue a school over their daughter not getting the office
Okay.
that she wanted in
Yep.
the student government.
Right.
Just really concerning. That's a very exaggerated picture of it, but I think it's easy to do. I don't want them to not do well on their school project, and I don't think they're as good at paper mache as I am. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to help a little in the places that they missed.
Right.
Now, not to say we can't support kids when they need it, but at the same time, if it becomes a pattern, that's when it becomes concerning.
Sure.
So snowplow, helicopter, backhoe, sidecar, which I go back to the old Adam West Batman show of the Robin stuck in the sidecar and slinging around the corners with Batman having zero control. And I'll never forget a mom who came in and she said, my daughter's really struggling with friends. And she said she's so anxious. She just gets locked up and doesn't know what to do and hangs back and feels really insecure. And I met this girl and she was not insecure at all. In fact, she had some things going on that I think made her very unaware and very overconfident.
Oh.
But because that had been the mom's experience, that's what she assumed was going on with her daughter. So she was along for the ride.
Okay. So the kid is in the sidecar, because I've known parents whose kids drove them around.
You're right. That should be one too.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good one too. Definitely.
Yeah,
and
that
then
makes a lot of sense.
Parade float parenting would be the last one, which is basically the parent who doesn't want anything to be hard, sad, scary, any emotion, again, that we might have considered negative. And so they're trying to stay on the parade and keep everything fun. I joke that my mom was kind of a parade float parent. And so when I was growing up and we lost a dog, she would go get the same kind of dog the same day and name it the same thing. Like I didn't notice that my dog shrunk from an adult dog to a puppy. I always
My parents did the same thing. That's crazy.
No, they did not, Eric. That's so funny.
My dog got
same
hit
name?
by an ice cream truck and lost its back legs, and then the next day I had a 4-legged dog again. It was crazy.
No,
same name, everything.
That is so. No, that's hilarious. So your parents might have been a little parade floaty too.
Maybe. It explains a lot.
That's so funny. Yes, that is so funny.
That's great. So these are
all of them.
These are great images, right? Like it's all sort of like diagnosing different problems. But what's the true north that we're aiming for? If it's not these things, what should we be? Is there an analogy or image there?
Well, the true north. That's a good question. The true north might be, it depends on their age. I mean, I think, you know what I think about are the little cars that are like at Disney World, those race cars, and not letting them drive in terms of them having the most power in the relationship and being in control of your house.
Sure.
But they've got to work their way towards doing the scary thing. And I think about this, that racetrack that has the bumper guide rails that are 3 times as wide as the car. And so you're still going down the path, but you're bumping along the way as you're doing it, where you're learning to drive better yourself and you're learning to keep a straighter course.
Yeah, I went to a bowling alley the other day and I saw the tricks they have now to make sure kids don't fail at bowling is
Yes.
pretty amazing.
Astounding.
Like no one can throw it in the gutter anymore. And you could have teenage kids using their little ramp for the ball and the bumper rails, and it's like that's an image in itself. And sometimes we have to let kids gutter ball it a few times, right?
That's
I think that's
true.
the image.
Right.
We had another guy on the podcast, Jeremy Pryor, who talks about sort of from a Christian vantage point, the image of family shouldn't be that of a nest where we are trying to launch kids off into the world and to be independent of the family, but it should be a multi-generational team that's on a mission. And in team building, you're trying to raise leaders for the next generation, right? That's what we're trying to do. That's the image of it. And every good leadership trainer will tell you that you need a mentor-mentee relationship where you do the training, you teach, and they watch, and then you talk about it. And then eventually you get to where they lead and you watch and you talk about it, and eventually they're able to lead on their own. I think that's sort of a good image of what we're trying to do as parents. And when you say, it depends on what age they are, absolutely. It's like, what age are our kids and what's appropriate for that age? I think that's the best way of looking at it.
Well, I love that analogy. That's great.
Yeah, it was so solid. I think a lot of parents might be listening right now and just thinking, "Wow, this sounds great," but our ship has sailed, maybe, or we're too deep in these problems and I've screwed up, so I'm just going to be more anxious now about the mistakes I've made. What would you say to parents about like where to begin to turn things around for the better?
Well, I really wrote all of the anxiety books as an attempt to say, hey, here's your first shot. Here's where to start. And they're based on the most widely researched therapy practice, which is called cognitive behavioral therapy with anxiety. So there's a lot of tricks and tips in those books. And so my hope is always that immediately somebody could read that and have some practical tools they can start using. And I think what I would want to remind anyone, I mean, two things. One is the longer anxiety goes untreated, the worse it gets. Mm-hmm. Because we're creating these neural pathways in our brain. But at the same time, we're always creating neural pathways. And there's this beautiful thing about how God made us called neuroplasticity that is true no matter how old we are. And so it really is never too late to go back and learn new strategies and to create new neural pathways in our brain. So we can change the ship quickly. And the things, cognitive behavioral therapy, I mean, I think you would read the book and think, well, that's simple. You know, it's things like breathing and things like practices to get our focus shifted off of the worry and pulling the worry out of our own heads and giving it a name. I mean, things that are really practical because it isn't hard. It's not, I mean, it is brain science, but it's not in some ways in that it's not so complicated. And so I think it's easy, accessible work, but we've got to do the work to make the difference.
It's so refreshing to hear you talk here and elsewhere about God and your work in therapy and God and neuroscience, because it's pretty rare that you see those lines connecting. We want to, in culture these days, sometimes keep theology and psychology separate for whatever reason. Where do you see God in this conversation about anxiety and parenting?
Well, I'd have to quote my good friend and boss, Melissa Trevathan, who started Daystar, and we were with a group of 7th and 8th graders. And she said, which I'll never forget, she said, courage isn't the antidote to anxiety, but trust is. And I love that statement so much because courage feels dependent on us. It feels dependent on me rising up and doing the hard thing all in my own power.
Sure.
And when we have faith in a God that we know loves us and is for us and redemptive, then I can trust that he really does have my good in mind. And so I may have to do hard things and it may not turn out the way I want it to be, but I also believe he loves me and is for me. And so my trust can change my perspective of what it feels like to walk into doing hard things, because I believe ultimately I'm going to be okay. And maybe even better than okay, God's going to use these things for good in my life. And the lives of the kids I love too. It's not just me. And so I think knowing that trust, I have this whole section in the new book about how trust transforms us. And I believe it's true. There's all these beautiful things that come as a byproduct of that.
Yeah. And it's cover to cover, it's biblical to trust God, to trust his promises for us, to trust that his will for us is for our good, that he has good plans for us. And, if you're raised anywhere around a church, you probably get that message loud and clear. And I think that's absolutely paramount. The other side of the conversation, though, is the work of sort of God's counterpart in the Bible, the devil, Satan, and the darkness, and all of that. And do you see any relationship between these spiritual sort of dark forces at work in the world and the anxiety that's running rampant in our lives?
Well, I definitely would say so. I mean, we know we are told to take every thought captive. And I think that's those anxious thoughts. I was doing a podcast with my friend Annie Downs. I don't know if you're familiar with Annie of Downs. And I was talking about the anxious voice and how we all have this voice in the back of our heads saying worst case scenario, saying we really failed. And she said, oh, you mean Satan's voice? Wow. And would never have jumped to that quickly, but I agree.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's exactly Annie. And I think it's nice to be able to step back and say, we know that he puts thoughts and ideas in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a thought that is defeating. There's this section I have in the book about God's voice versus worry's voice. And as I'm saying worry's voice, I mean Satan's voice,
Yeah.
because he limits us, he lies to us, all of the things that worry does. And it's fascinating. Even if I'm going to jump back to neuroscience, one of the things that happens is the more often I become anxious, the more likely I am to become anxious, because my amygdala enlarges and it develops this hyper responsiveness. And
Yeah.
so anxiety starts to lie to me and make me believe it's true, which is completely what we would say Satan does.
Right.
And so the
He's the father of
parallel
lies.
is
Yeah,
really
that's right.
significant. Exactly. Yes. Yes. So I love that you brought those two things together, because I think it is very true.
It's delicate, I'll be honest, because you probably are like me and you got a family in your office. Like, the last thing you want to say when they're expressing their deepest concerns is, well, your child is hearing the devil's voice.
Absolutely.
It's probably a little
Right.
unsettling. Well, it's Satan
Yes.
talking to your children. And
Right.
yet,
That would be a little rattling.
we want to be delicate, but we also want to be truthful. And this is just what he does. He lies to
Yeah.
us. He lies to us
Yes.
about who we are. He lies to us about who God is, and about what's important. And to trust God is to also reject the lies that we're being told. And I think that's an important reminder for anybody that's listening.
Oh, I was about to say, thank you for that reminder. Yes, you're exactly right.
Yeah, I just think sometimes we just want to keep it positive and light, and there's
Not
more
talk
to the
about those
story.
things.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I know we're almost out of time. I just wondered if you could help me first of all, and our listeners with any tools to start with. Like, what tools can we pull out of our tool chest at home to deal with these issues, especially around anxiety and parenting? Any practical things that anybody can do?
Yes. One of my favorite practical things, I mean, there is a lot that psychology teaches us about the word mindfulness, which I think in Christendom, it can feel like that's like the hokey pokey, turn yourself around. It just sounds so weird.
Yeah.
But I came across and ended up using in the book what are called breath prayers. And what we know, as we were talking about, when the amygdala takes over, we're more anxious. And when we can do deep breathing in those moments, the blood vessels in our brain dilate, and it shifts the blood flow away from the away from the amygdala and back to the prefrontal cortex. So literally the act of slow, deep breathing gets us back into our thinking brain.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of taking a verse, be still and know that I am God. And we slowly breathe in and think about be still. And then we slowly breathe out, for you are God. Or we breathe in, I can do all things. We breathe out, through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah.
And in those moments, I am doing the scientific, research-based work of slowing down my body, where that I'm going to be less anxious, but I'm also anchoring myself to God's word, which we know has profound effect on who we are emotionally and spiritually and all those things.
Sure. Wow.
So that's
so
one
good.
of my favorites.
What about how we talk to each other at home? I mean, and how we as a family unit deal with anxiety when it rears its head. Are there practical things we can do as a team, and we can agree on, like, we're gonna do this together, or we're gonna say this when whatever? Are there any tips you might offer families?
I have a friend who said, I wish when I was growing up, my mom had said, you've got this, more than let me get this for you. And I would guess her mom was maybe anxious. So she was saying a lot of, let me get this for you. And what I love mantras. I love it's just a silly word for sayings that we can go back to over and over. And so if the saying in our house is, you can do hard things, or I believe in you, or we can all do all things through Christ who strengthens us. But something, I have a 5-year-old nephew, and we went to Disney World last year, and I had never taken a 5-year-old to Disney, but there's a lot that's scary.
Yeah.
and so I got down on his level and I said, Henry, a little bit scared, a whole lot of fun. A little bit scared, a whole lot of fun. And we said it all over Disney World.
Wow.
And it's funny, he was going to school in August. after all that. And I said, Henry, a little bit scared, a whole lot of fun. And he calls me Diddy. And he said, Diddy, school is not that fun. But that has been a mantra. I mean, I have a new puppy, as you mentioned, and we were going to get the puppy, and I got so nervous yesterday. And my sister with my nephew in the car said, Diddy, a little bit scared, a whole lot of fun. And I said, you're exactly right.
It's the power of words. The words we choose can really mean a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So having things like that we can say, I think makes a huge difference for all of us.
Right. I don't guess there's any chance we can see the puppy, is there? Is he still there?
Well, the funny thing is, I'm trying to occupy her as we're talking. Can you see her?
Oh, yeah,
Little
just
head.
barely.
Here, I'll turn her around. Her name's Patches.
Patches.
Can you say hi, Patches?
Adorable.
Oops, she's caught in my cord. Isn't she cute?
She
hi,
is.
Patches.
And she's so good.
Well, mostly. She's been sleeping, so she'll be bad soon. But
she's
hopefully
adorable.
She's got big shoes to fill in terms of helping kids. So
Oh, yeah, and she will do a great
hopefully
job.
she'll do great.
Thank you for introducing us to Patches.
Oh, yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, well, one last question is just for parents that might really be feeling it right now and wondering sort of if there's hope for their family. Like, where does the hope lie for a family that has sort of been through the war of deceit and lies that anxiety brings? Where does the hope lie, you think?
Oh, I think there is so much hope, and I think our hope is found in Christ. And not to oversimplify, because again, there are times we need therapy. There are times our anxiety is significant enough that we need medication. But there are people out there who love God and who are well equipped to help in those places. But I think just to know that you're not alone, to know that I really do believe that God can redeem all things. And as a therapist for 30 years, some of the kids and families that I have seen struggle with anxiety and struggle with different issues are some of the most amazing, strong people who their faith has transformed them in the midst of that and transformed their worries. And so that's the reminder I would want to give.
Thank you so much. And everybody that's listening or watching, I hope they heard that there is hope. No matter what, there's always hope. And Sissy Goff, you are a blessing, my friend.
Eric, thank you. You too. I'm so glad to be with you.
I'm grateful. And I know you were just in Houston, but we would love to bring you back out for a family weekend here at our church.
I would love it.
We'll be in touch about that. But
I love Houston. I'd come anytime for the Mexican food, and to get to be with y'all would just be an added
Yeah, I see you have your priorities in order, so that's good. And once again, this is Sissy Goff's latest book, The Worry-Free Parent. I hope y'all will pick it up wherever books are sold. And Sissy Goff, thank you so much, and I pray you'll just keep going and persevere and share the hope of Christ with the whole world.
Thank you, Eric. You too.
Thanks for being with us.